You've been making films for many years. Hubert's Travels were your first story film, which you did direct. What persuaded you to take this on?
Well, I'm basically a documentary filmmaker, and I like to film things as they happen, off the cuff, so to speak, and then compile the film during the edit. But story films are completely different. And as a member of Finchley Cinevideo Society, as it was called then, Trevor Williams was producing a film, and he asked me to direct it. And he then had to try and assemble crew and cast, the key members of which were Bruce Allams, was the cameraman and editor. He was crucial. Bruce, in fact, had been an editor with one of the big commercial TV companies for many years. I've forgotten who it was. Perhaps just as well I don't mention it. I don't know who it was, but he was very experienced editor. He wouldn't be only editing the film, but he was going to shoot it as well. And he was one of them. The lighting man was Peter Kidman, and there was Eileen Kenny, who was, I think, script supervisor. There were other people involved, but really it was Trevor the producer, I was the director, and Bruce Allams was the editor and cameraman. So that's how I came involved. Through Finchley, I was asked to direct it.
How did you go about finding the locations for the film?
Now, the locations of the film were really in the hands of Trevor as producer. I was only asked to approve them once he'd picked them. I think he also had other members of the club helping select them. It's quite tricky location filming, even as amateurs, because there are all sorts of rules about using tripod in public places. There's all sorts of rules about not filming children, and also other considerations. And they had to be carefully selected, but I didn't select them at all. Obviously we needed a park, because the integral part of the film is a lot of it happens in a park. We used the grounds of Avenue House, which at that time was the base for the Finchley Club, and in fact is owned by Barnet Council, and used as an arts centre and one thing another community centre. And so there was no problem in using the location, because it was making the film partly for them. So that's was a no-brainer as far as they were concerned. And luckily it had a lake, it had all the bench, had all the things that they wanted for locations. So other locations, the final cottage out in the country, we all drove out there to it was very tight inside, very small, I seem to remember, and the cameraman had all sorts of problems, but all those end scenes with Muriel, the old lady, welcoming the bear back, were done out at that cottage. Other locations, a few street scenes, I think, which were no real problem locally. That was the location aspect.
They say never work with animals and children. How did you find working with the little 5-year-old Ben?
Well, he's a nephew of mine, actually, or a second cousin or something, because his mum, who appears in the film, is a cousin who I've known since she was a little girl, which helps, I think. But I think children, he's very good. He was a natural, actually. He was very good. Children like performing, by and large. You don't pick them unless they do. So I don't think children are any problem at all. Actors don't like working with children. That saying of don't work with children and animals applies to actors, because they're scene stealers. I didn't care if he stole the scene. In fact, I wanted him to steal the scene. So as a director, I was very happy. So that was no problem.
You had a number of interesting characters in the film. Can you tell us about them?
You mean characters in the film, or characters as people, the actors?
The actors.
Yes. Well, we had Kenneth Seeger, who was playing one of the... he was playing a sort of outraged husband in one scene in the restaurant. And he was an actor. He had been a professional actor and also a script reader and one thing or another, and he's acted in loads of Finchley films for many, many years, so very experienced guy. He was very good, but he unfortunately since died. He passed away about 18 months ago, but he could be quite a prickly character, so he wanted things done properly, but he was real pro, he was no problem. Other interesting characters, well, there was Norman Saville, who was an elderly chap as well, who was the father of one of the youngsters in the film. But all filmmakers, everybody who'd been involved in film, so it was no problem. We had two pro actors, young semi-pro actors, aspiring actors, who I didn't get, but Trevor found, I think, there's a site, a website called Finding People. I'm not sure what it's called, but where you can get actors, and professional actors who aren't working quite like to do non-commercial films. They're not getting paid in any way, but they like to have something on their CV. First of all, it's experience for them, and secondly, they can put on their CV, and they've got it for a show reel. They can put excerpts from it. So it's quite. But they were very personable young people, but I hadn't met them until we did a casting afternoon, where I was introduced to them, and we did camera tests and one thing or another. But I didn't actually cast them, only approve them. And Trevor did, I think, most of the actual casting. Who else did we have? We had Vincent Tempest, who played the young son, one of the people who find the bear. And he'd had a row with his family, and he'd gone off at night to sleep in the park, and I found the bear left on the park bench. He was very good.
What about Freya Walker, who played the part of Susie? How did you make her act so convincingly when she was so young?
Well, Freya's my granddaughter, as it happens. But young girls, generally, especially with two brothers, elder brothers who she had, aren't shy, generally speaking, especially not when they've had to stand up for themselves. And her father, my son-in-law Paddy, who also appears in the film, he had been an actor with the Young English National Youth Theatre, I think, many years ago. He acted with the English National Youth Theatre, and and then appeared in reviews and things at the Edinburgh Festival when he was at Durham University. But so no problems with them because I knew them very well, and they are also quite good.
At the other end of the spectrum, you had Muriel, who must have been acting for many years.
Yes, Muriel Agius. She is the widow of an old member of Finchley, Edward Agius, who appeared in many, many Finchley films, 10 Best Winners, successful films, and was a stalwart of the club. And Muriel also appeared in quite a lot of the Finchley films long before I joined, actually, so I really wasn't involved in the making of all those famous films. But she was no problem. She was very good. She just played herself, actually. She played an old lady very well.
Turning to locations, the restaurant scene must have been difficult to do. How was that done?
Well, the restaurant scene was quite key in the film, and I knew that restaurant well, and the owner, because it was within about 200 yards of my home, and I often ate there. And I knew the then owner, it's since changed hands, and he was quite happy to agree to us to use it. On one of the days when they're shut, I think it's one day a week, they were closed, and not even going to open for the evening. So we had a nice clear run from, most of all the day. And I recce'd it, obviously, and had a look with the producer and probably the cameraman as well, I can't remember, and the lighting man. It had a nice big street window, which gave us nice light, and we had the run of the place, and knowing the owner and everything else, it was no problem at all. So that was good. As they were shut, we couldn't get food there. We needed food, of course, for the scene. So we used there's an Italian restaurant about 4 or 5 doors further down, who I also knew, but not as well. and we just got steaming plates of spaghetti from them. That worked fine. And even the noise from the street wasn't obtrusive because it was a restaurant anyway, and we saw buses and things going by. And opposite was very good because we could get to the balcony of, I think, a converted house or houses or flats right opposite, because we wanted a high view of the pavement for some of the pavement action. So that location actually worked very well. In the park, there were a few crucial locations. This was actually the nub of the film was in the park, really, where Hubert was discovered and rescued from the lake as well. And we went and looked at the park quite carefully. We needed a bench, a park bench for the young Vincent to lie on and discover the thing. We needed a bench for the lovers to sit down on the same bench. It had to be visible from various places, so we had to scout around quite carefully. No, it was okay. The park fitted our purpose perfectly. One of the scenes had to be shot where the family in the film are leaving, or the father is leaving the family to go off and work in the Middle East, as I recall, and there's a conflict within the family, which is finally resolved by Hubert, but because all these scenes are involving families in conflict, which Hubert solves or cures. And this particular family are starting their conflict because the father's going off to take a job in the Middle East, and he's leaving home with suitcases in this Range Rover, and then and he drove off down the road, and then of course you can cheat wherever they turn up at. That's no problem. The dialogue also worked well. There was no wind that day, and we had I seem to remember a mic on a boom, which got pretty near, and it all worked very well. There was a scene to shoot in the Range Rover where there was no room for the director, just the cameraman and the actors, and that I think was also shot. No, it wasn't shot in the road, it was shot in the main road because they wanted traffic going by. But no, location-wise it worked well. At the cottage, it was finding it was quite a problem. We went out in a convoy, if I recall. We had, for the scene, we needed a Range Rover. The Range Rover we'd used in the scene back on the Finchley Road, outside the restaurant. And so that had to be there, obviously. And there was a very narrow road outside the cottage, but it's a little country road. And there was space to park the Range Rover. We had to be a bit careful with passing traffic, as I recall, but there was no real problem. It had to be visible from inside the cottage. There's a scene where the old lady looks out of the window and sees someone going to the Range Rover, so it had to be visible. It had to be parked in a precise place. And there was a little bit of a problem with local traffic. I think someone had to stand at the back of the car and wave or stop people coming when we were shooting, but no real problem. It was out in the country. It would have been more problem if in the middle of London.
Looking back, how do you view the experience of directing Hubert's travels?
Well, I found it fairly stressful, actually, because being used to working on my own, I deliberately always work on my own, doing documentaries, because I like to be in complete control. I don't want to be beholden to anybody, and I like to know what is happening. So I found it fairly stressful having to ask other people to do things and rely on other people. But I got used to it, and everybody was so good that it was nice to perhaps be able to rely on them in some respects. And Bruce with the camera. I like to look through the viewfinder often to see how it's framing and one thing or another, but I got used to it. But I did find it stressful. Also, the arrangements, having to go to location, and though I wasn't responsible, we had to make sure people were watered and fed, and that our timings were okay, and that we didn't have too many extraneous noises and things like that. which I also found quite stressful, because with a documentary, any other noise that happens is fine. That's what's happening. It's reality. Whereas with a drama or story film, you're pretending the whole time. So no, it was fine in the end. But working in a team was alien to me from the point of view of filmmaking. Well, part of the conditions of the scriptwriting competition were, of course, that the film would be premiered at the Phoenix Cinema. And that put a bit more pressure on us than it might normally do, because we had to make sure it was presentable and the sound was fine for a cinema, where I know that cinema sound systems are pretty good, and they're very different from the sound systems we're used to showing our films on, so it has to be very good. So, but one of the conditions was that it would be shown at the Phoenix. So there was no problem with the arrangements of that. We had to wait, first of all, quite a long time for us to actually complete the film, and also for the Phoenix to be able to organise it, because they've got pre-arranged programs and one thing or another. And it was also down to the Barnet Arts people to some extent. I can't remember exactly what happened. I wasn't really involved. Trevor and I think his committee were more involved at this stage. They had contacts at the Phoenix Cinema. But it was, we asked all the actors, of course, everyone involved in the film came. And it was shown on their big screen. It looked very good, even though it was DV. It was shown off a mini DV tape, as I recall. It was exciting. Everybody was there, and we were out the front with the actors, I think, or some of them. I remember the children, I remember particularly being out the front with, and I think someone interviewed us, if I remember. It worked very well, and it was great. It was a nice occasion, and we fulfilled the terms of our arrangement for running the script competition, choosing a film, making it, and having it shown. So we were reasonably happy. I think people liked the film. There were always things you regret when you've finished a film, but once it's done, it's done.